Hannah Cox, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I was saying before we started rolling that I saw you on Larry Sharp earlier today. That was a great interview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that interview. He's a great host, and that was my first time on his program, so it was a good time.
Yeah, he's a bad dude. He was interviewed by a buddy of mine, TK Coleman, and TK and I went to college together.
I'm going to ask how you knew TK.
Yeah, we've been best friends for forever, and old philosophy buddies. A lot of late conversations discussing the meaning of existence and all of that kind of stuff. And both of us grew up, Christian. He's a preacher's kid, and so we have a lot to discuss. He has a theater background.
I didn't know that. I have a theater background. This is actually a growing trend I'm noticing in the liberty movement. I keep finding people who have like a theater or music background that are now doing this kind of work. So that's funny.
Yeah, well, I think some folks may have been pushed in a certain direction based on the lack of clubs open for music at this time. But my main thing is I teach at Ohio State, and just rewinding there, his theater background. He's a good singer, and one of the best, most talented actors you've probably ever seen. He decided to go a different direction with it, but such a articulate, clear thoughts, clear ideas, as clear as I've heard from anyone.
Yeah, he's astoundingly brilliant. I've loved getting to follow him and get to know him a little bit more, especially since I've been doing some work with Fee in recent months. And I just love his attitude. He's so positive and optimistic and has such a great outlook. And I'm into philosophy as well, but I really struggle with like the opposite. I go more towards nihilism a lot of the time. Like none of this even matters, and can get very negative. So I love having his influence. He's such a bright spot, and yeah, he's fantastic.
Now that's interesting because, I read your article about Martin Luther King, a recent article, and in that article you talk about sort of King was optimistic, so were there things about Martin Luther King that you sort of discovered in your process of writing this article?
Yeah, well, the article actually, I had the idea for it a while back based on a podcast that I listened to. I love the podcast Hidden Brain. It's produced by NPR and Sean Kirby-Dantum, and I listen to it all the time. It's very influential on my life. And they had an episode a while back that was focusing on Martin Luther King Jr.'s theory of nonviolence, but specifically under that, his theory of redemptive suffering. And I really had not dug in, at least not in depth, into Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy and his theory of change. And so I thought that was so fascinating. And I started researching it a little bit more at that time, found that he had been influenced by his Christian worldview, which I'm also a Christian, also a PK as well, a pastor's kid. So it's in keeping with a lot of my ideology in that regard. And then, of course, he was influenced by Gandhi as well. And so I was excited to write that article. I aspire to follow Martin Luther King Jr.'s theories of nonviolence and of how he really went about trying to affect change in the world. But I have to be honest, it's hard. His theory is not easy to follow. And of the 6 principles he really lays out for following this theory of change, I would say the one I struggle with the most is optimism. He'd had a very much an optimistic outlook. He believed that the world's moral arc bent towards justice and that there was a cosmic force fighting on the side of people who were working to right and justice. And while I do believe that, it it comes a lot slower than I would like it to. And so I can get discouraged in that. And it can feel really, I don't know, just harsh and cold and like it's, sometimes I question God and how can you let these things go on for the time periods that they have. But that's why I think it's great to have these spiritual giants and leaders in our history. And I think we're kind of lacking them in the present moment. We really are in need of them to have people who hold to these higher ideals that we can aspire to. And I think that is the proper posture to look through the world at. That's the lens that we should be viewing things at. I do think he's right. Even if you look at his own life, he was not well liked. When he was killed, I think over 2/3 of the country did not have a favorable view of MLK. And then you look at what happened after he went through what he would call his unearned suffering. And it really had a massive impact on this country and on white America and on the way that we viewed segregation and racial justice in this country. And now if you look at how the country feels about him, it's starkly different to what it was at that time. So I think his own philosophy has been proven true by his life, but it requires sacrifice. He gave up his life. He was a martyr for his cause. I don't think that's being asked of most of us, but I do think that if you're standing for what's right, if you're standing on principles, if you're fighting for people who have been oppressed, you are going to be persecuted, you are going to be looked down upon, and you are going to face significant challenges, especially in the present era in this country.
Yeah, the optimism thing, that's hard for me too. It's hard because I'm a realist. I think that's my sort of natural, orientation, whatever. So interested in saying things in a clear way that represent and that they represent reality. They don't add to it. They don't take away from it. They don't. Now, my wife is an optimist, and so she might tell you that I'm a pessimist. But if you're stating facts about the way that something actually is, and it is something that is negative, then that's what it's going to be, right? If you're stating facts about something that is positive, then it's going to sound positive, right? And a challenge I have, even in Kings, like you said, that there's this arc that's bending towards, towards truth and justice, right? Man, I just don't know how you can see it that way. I mean, just looking at the way that the world is, looking at all of recorded history, this country has only been around for, a few hundred years, and the lifestyle that people enjoy here is so much better than at any time in history. And yet in our own country, there's massive injustice, right? There's a lot of things that are not right, and there are certain groups of people that, have had a hard time, let's put it that way, for a long time. The richer keep getting richer, the poorer keep getting poorer. The political structure seems to be totally a complete failure. It seems to me that folks are just monkeying around behind the scenes. They act like they hate each other in front of the camera, Democrats and Republicans I'm talking about. But then, you discover that, this one just loaned that one their yacht for their their daughter's wedding and stuff. And all like that. Wait a minute, they said that he was worse than the devil, in front of the camera. It's like, what's going on? And you see this kind of stuff, and it makes you question things. And I'm only stating things about the best system of government in the history of the world, and out of this governmental system, the most.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
And out of this governmental system, the most wealth has been created, the most pulling people out of poverty has created in the history of the world. Now consider everywhere else in the world currently, and then consider what things were like prior to the existence of United States of America. So it's hard for me to see this arc towards justice. Now that sounds like super dark. I know. It's like, I think your wife's right. I think you are.
Yeah. No, it's like I told you, I have to struggle with not being a nihilist. So because of these things, I don't think you're wrong, right? I think it's hard to see. And then I think, if you sit back and you objectively look at it, you can say, where was humanity 50, 100 years ago? Where was the global progress, and where are we now? And you can see that things are getting better, but it doesn't feel like they're getting better. And even though they're getting better, we were starting from a place of like, they were really, really terribly bad. And now they're just a little bit less terribly bad. Is that bending towards justice? It's slowly building towards justice. It's slowly getting better, but it is moving at a snail's pace, and at a pace where I think most of us can anticipate that we probably don't get to live to see it come to fruition, right? And that can be hard to keep the faith and continue working. I love the quote that says, the wise man is someone who plants seeds for trees they'll never sit under the shade of. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but essentially that. And I think that's what we are called to do. I think that is what many people are doing in their advocacy and their work right now, but knowing that probably we won't get to see the ultimate reward for that. And I think that was true of King's work as well. He didn't really get to see the ultimate reward for his work and for all that he endured, but certainly we can see now, looking back in history, what that full picture looks like.
Yeah. When I was a kid, and, this was, and I think there was a certain rebel kind of quality that he had, that I was drawn to, Malcolm X. And I kind of politically, I moved away from that sort of, I think I was sort of a progressive, maybe I was a Democrat. I don't know. My parents are Democrats, so I think I was definitely influenced by that. And there was something different about Malcolm X, though, because, his whole thing was about black people being able to stand on their own 2 feet, right? It was about not requiring, creating a situation where we don't require the assistance of, governmental, handouts and all that kind of thing. He was very conservative, actually.
Interesting. I don't think I knew that.
It's kind of interesting as I look back. Much of what it was that he was saying would align pretty clearly. It would be pretty conservative. It would be pretty conservative. These days, I think of myself as more of somewhere between a black nationalist and a libertarian or something. The reason for the black nationalist thing is because I'm seeing now that no one is really going to fully advocate for black people. The Democrats. Let's look at what's going on right now. So I don't know if Joe Biden's campaign sat down with Black Lives Matter or not. Before now, but the latest I heard that they hadn't even had a discussion. Now,
That's
Black Lives Matter had raised $10 billion for his campaign, right? And it's the same okey doke. I think the Democrats just take black people for granted. Now, at least they will show up right before an election. They come to our churches. I'm a church musician too, a minister of music at a church. It's a missionary Baptist church. So, you know, politicians will show up at the church, you know, right before the election. And, you know, there's all these get out the vote stuff. It's right before the election. But then after the election, nowhere to be seen. You don't see them for another, you know, 2 years or 4 years, depending on what the election is. But at least they will show up. Republicans don't even try.
Right.
They don't even try. It's
right.
like, come on,
true.
man. It's like I think maybe to their defense, they have decided that they can. So you only have a certain amount of time. You know, so you have to be efficient about how you spend that time before an election, right? So you could say, well, black folks are not going to vote for us, not in big numbers, right? So what's a better way for us to spend our time, right? And so you have these pollsters, and they, on the campaign management, they say, okay, this is where you can make your money right here. Let's spend our time right here then. We got to spend more of our time right here. And so, and I don't think that the black community is even on the radar. And although I identify with a lot of more conservative kind of principles, I'm a Christian, I'm pro-life, you know, there's a long list of other things that I resonate with, but there's a sort of snobbery and a kind of looking down the nose, or Republicans often, to me, come across as jerks. Let's put it that way. When they're talking about racial issues, they come off like they're jerks, and there seems to be an oversimplified solution that they present for certain problems. You know, just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can do it. Get out there and make, you know, and be somebody. Say, well, yeah, I get that, but maybe there's a more nuanced way that you could put that, so it could be a little more palatable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think about any of that stuff?
Yeah, I have no pushback at all. You know, I was raised sort of in the latter way of thinking, right? Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I came from working class roots. My dad was the first person in his family to go to college. We came from, you know, really poor Alabama. And so I'd seen that modeled in my family and very much had that attitude. And the truth was, you know, up until really college, I didn't know any black people. The country is still so segregated in our day-to-day lives. And it really was when I graduated, I told you I was in music first, and I worked for a black gospel label. And that was a huge moment in my life where I really got to know people whose backgrounds were different than mine. I got to hear their experiences, and all of a sudden, like all that nuance you're talking about, right? Like it came out, and yeah, we should teach people to work hard and to strive, but there are real reasons. Not everybody's born with boots to pull themselves up with the bootstraps by, right? Like you have to take into account some of these things. And then after that period of my life, I worked for a free market think tank, and it was in Tennessee. And one thing I learned there that was so important was to never sit in a room in an ivory tower and try to come up with policy solutions for people you don't know. And so we really did go into communities in Tennessee and talk to people and figure out what the issues were that were impacting them. And what I found when I went and showed up in the black community was a real openness. They were excited we were there. They said what you said, you know, you guys have never shown up here before. You've never come to talk to us. We haven't had Republicans or Libertarians really showing up and caring about our issues. And I found that they also shared your feelings that the Democratic Party had not really been following through, that they at least paid lip service, but they didn't ever actually follow through with policies that would help people. And there was a real eagerness for like new solutions, new ideas, new approaches. We ended up doing a lot of work around things like natural hair braiding, the licensing around natural hair braiding that was really having a very serious impact on women in the Black community in Memphis. Many of them had been fined tens of thousands of dollars for braiding hair without a license. There was this whole crony government scheme that was meant to basically force people to go to the cosmetology schools, pay $30,000 for a degree that had nothing to do with natural hair braiding, enrich the state, enrich the people that sat on the boards. And then if they didn't do it, they, fined them over and over. And so we got to work on some things like that. And it was so informative for me. But what it taught me was that, there's a lot of synergy there that's possible. But I do agree that nobody has really been showing up for the Black community. And I think that there's real potential for us to try to make inroads when we're coming from the liberty movement, to go and try to find ways that we can actually address the things that are hurting the community most, that are keeping people down. And I do think there are real systemic issues in this country that were put there intentionally, many of them, many of these laws that were put there intentionally to push the Black community down, that we need to be elevating and working to eliminate. So that's something that I've seen more and more people in the liberty movement beginning to talk about, but I'm very passionate about that continuing to be a message we lift up, because I think there's a real opportunity and a real space for people in the Black community within the liberty movement. And I'd like to see that continue to grow.
Yeah, there is how familiar with the manosphere or the Black manosphere or red pill? Have you heard these terms?
I've heard red pill and blue pill.
Okay. All right. So, of course, the red pill, blue pill thing, that comes from, the Matrix movie, and so to be red pilled is to be is to become a realist and to see things for what they are. I couldn't resist. And the blue pill is to basically, I'm just going to stay oblivious and ignorant of what's actually happening. Now, the connotation is that due to the effects of, I think everyone agrees with first wave feminism. No one has an issue with that. But with third and fourth wave, in particular, have, I think, created a certain dynamic. And that dynamic has, in particular, been very destructive in the Black community. So let me explain. So in the Black community, only 25% of women will get married. Of Black women will get married. Only 25%. You have this out of wedlock birth rate, and which is 75% or something. And so when politicians talk about helping Black families, they're not talking about Black men. They're talking about women and children. And if you can consider all of the most of the sort of massive injustices in the Black community, they're in particular a persecution of men. So consider like the 94 crime bill.
Mm-hmm. War on drugs.
The war on drugs, mass incarceration, disproportionate sentencing, even thinking of things like, and this is across the board, not just for Black folks, but for everybody, disproportionate sentencing. So if a guy does a murder and a woman does a murder, the sentences are totally different. And that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I think in general, our society doesn't know how to address some of those kinds of issues, because I think There's aspects of our society that are still trying to protect women, because that's the sort of that's the masculine thing to do, right? Is to protect women and children, right? But one thing that's happening is there is this certain narrative that I don't need no man. I don't. What is it? What is the saying? I need a man is as useful as I can't remember. As a bicycle is for fishing or something. I can't remember it. I can't remember what the saying is. But I understand that what's happened is because so black women have said, okay, well, if there's not going to be any guys around, we're going to pursue education. Okay, so you have a lot of women with advanced degrees, but what happens is as you get a higher and higher degree, the nature of things is such that if say I have a master's degree, I'm making $100K. There's a small percentage of men, of people, period, that are making $100K plus, right? And so what it does is as you get more educated, the chances of getting married are going down, right? And so you really can't have everything. And all of this stuff disproportionately affects the black community, and in particular black women. And there's this big wedge that's being driven between black men and black women. Part of it is because men tend to be more conservative in their thinking. And so what happened in this last election was you had a higher percentage of black men that voted for Trump, than women, right? Almost no black women voted for Trump, right?
Right.
But you had about 15% or something like that, 15 or 20% of men, black men, that voted for Trump. And that's an increased percentage, but I think you're seeing more and more of this. And so anyhow, there's a lot of issues there. But basically what the manosphere, and in particular the black manosphere, is it's a bunch of YouTube content creators that produce content that basically highlight some of these kinds of issues. Now, granted, it ain't Christian stuff.
I think I've seen one of these videos actually, but I didn't know the term for it.
Yeah. It's pretty abrasive. I mean, they're just saying what they think. It's like the new barbershop. Women have always had sort of, I think, language and relationships to sort of talk through relationship issues and things with other women. That's not what men usually do. And so it seems like there's aspects of this that are sort of serving that purpose. And there's a lot of Christian men that are in that community, and they're in that community because in particular the black church, but church in general has become less sort of catering to the needs of men, right? And I think that's an issue and a problem that I think that church needs to confront, needs to deal with, because you already have this natural dip of men, of people, period, disappearing from church. They go to college.
Right.
They're probably not going to college, going to church when they're in college, right? And then maybe when they get married, they'll start coming back, maybe this religion thing's all right. But what's happening in the black community is men are just not coming back. Mm-hmm. And so you go to a black church and it's a lot of single mothers. That's and it's not there it's not that way every place, but it's there a lot. So yeah, I said a lot again, but I'm saying that there is, all of this stuff is connected.
Yeah.
Certain policies that the Democrats embrace, and although Democrats are supported by black folks, those same policies are actually killing us. Mm-hmm. Really hurting us.
Yeah.
So
it's right. And, and I think some of those same issues are seen in the white community, but to a lesser degree, right? It's becoming really visible in the black community. And in what you were saying about church and men not having as many outlets and places to go and communicate and open up made me think of another component. I have a colleague who's a black man, and he's a therapist. It's not his full-time work. He does criminal justice reform with me full-time, but in his spare time, he's a therapist. And he was talking about how few black men seek therapy because if they're going to go, they want to talk to another black man as a therapist, which I get. When I go to therapy, I want to talk to a woman that's close to my age. That's what I'm most comfortable with. And he was saying, the lack of even having very many male black therapists prevents men from having that avenue as well in the black community and having that kind of assistance or place to communicate. And so it does seem to me that if you really, kind of take the 100-foot view of the black community, the black men are really hurting. They've been hurt by the state the most of any other population group I can think of, but then the community binds are breaking. And I think that there's a real problem with church in our country in general. And this is something I'm pretty passionate about, that I see it breaking down, one, because it's become so politicized. And I think that that's a real turnoff for people. It's really kind of gotten so intertwined with one part or the other, and that's a problem. The other problem is the church isn't doing its work. The church isn't going into communities. I'm somebody who believes in a very limited government. I don't think that the government should be doing a lot of these things that people push for it to do, but I certainly think Christians should be. I think churches should be. I think they should be in the communities, taking care of people, working with people, giving them assistance. And we're not seeing that from a lot of our churches. I live in South Carolina right now. There's a church on every corner. And yet we have homeless people, and yet we have people who can't get medical care, and yet we have people who have mental health issues, and yet we have kids that are going hungry and don't have the resources, on and on and on, and I think that we really need to step up as individuals and make church a place that people feel like they can go and organize and actually affect change. Because if it's not that, what is the point? You're just getting up early to go be told about hell on a Sunday morning. That's not a great advertisement. Nobody's going to be motivated to go join in on that. And I think the same could be said of our criminal justice system. We so often say, why can't we get better people working in our criminal justice system, in corrections or in policing? And the answer is because we don't provide an avenue for people to affect change in a productive way in those roles. It's not the pay. You see plenty of people going into jobs that pay $30,000, $40,000, teachers, social workers, but they're doing that because they want to work in avenues where they can affect change. If we had a criminal justice system that was about rehabilitation, I think you would attract better people who wanted to do that work. But because it's about being punitive, you don't attract great people for these low-paying jobs. And so I think there's some overlap in those kind of areas. But as a whole, the church needs to do a much better job if it wants to survive. Because right now, I feel like it's on its way out in this country.
Yeah, it's and so the really aggressive feminist stuff. A lot of that stuff has been, I think, embraced by a lot of churches. And that is, I think, part of the reason why you see a sort of mass exodus of men. But it's a tricky topic. So, I mean, I've worked at a bunch of different churches, and I've worked at mega churches, I've worked at smaller churches. I grew up in a church that was a pretty good sized church. It was about maybe 800 or 900 members. That's bigger than most churches in the country. My first full-time job after I finished my master's degree was as a pastor's assistant and band director for a church that was about 2,000 members. So I've been in churches, and then I worked at a church that was about 10,000 members. There's a real pressure to fill the seats. Let's just say what it is. Let's just say what it is. There's a lot of pressure to fill the seats. So if you have an auditorium that seats 5,000, then even if you have 3,500 people there, then the nature of the thing is to look, 1,500 seats are not filled, right? And I think the natural thing to do, I'm not saying is right, but it's human nature, is how can I adjust things to try to fill those 1,500 seats? And okay, now let's look at this other way. So say if you don't have a lot of men in your church, say if most of the congregation are women, say 80%, 85%, and you have a similar kind of dynamic. Now, are you going to say things from the pulpit that are going to turn off the 85%? Or are you going to, if you're going to lean in a direction, which way are you going to lean? You still have to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of employees, you have a mortgage, you have a lot of things going on. And although we don't want to look at that as real factors, those are real factors. And now this is honestly why I'm actually sort of philosophically opposed to the whole mega church kind of the idea, mm-hmm. because first of all, it's not a biblical kind of, I mean, you can see what they were doing in the Bible. That doesn't seem to fit that. And then secondly, if you have to have a staff of pastors so that you can actually have some interaction with the congregation, that may be an indication that the church is too big, because you would want to have, as a pastor, you would want to have that interaction with the congregation. Right. But anyhow, okay, so I said a bunch of stuff again, and I feel like I'm going on some tangents and things. But my point is that all of this stuff is, it's all connected. It's all, they're all factors. I do hope that, I do hope that the church starts to wake up, recognize some of these issues, because these issues have been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're not new issues, right? I mean, these were issues back when, 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, these were, since I've been working in churches, they've been issues. So anyhow.
Yeah, so, and I think you're smart to call attention to these issues, though, because you're right. Like, they are all part of this fabric that make up our culture. And I think so often in some of the interviews I do, everyone's so focused on the government and how do we fix the government. But the government it represents us, right? I always say politics flows downstream from culture. If we really want to fix this over here, we've got to do the work in our culture, which is, interpersonal work. It's relationships work. It's community work. It's working on yourself and how you show up in the world. And I think that so many of our issues are starting down here, and then we end up over here very divided and with the very big government problems that we have. But a lot of it is community. It's relationships between men and women. It's the church, and I think that's a really prudent thing to focus on.
And that's why this whole red pill stuff was attractive to me, was because I'm like, what is interesting about this? Why are people interested in this? And then when you get in there, it's like, oh, that's why, because they're talking about all kinds of stuff that you're not going to hear this stuff at church. This is, much of this discussion is either taboo or you're just not allowed to have these conversations. And where are men going to go that never had a relationship with their dad? Where are they going to go in order to have conversations about, man, I'm not having success, with girls. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to talk to girls. I don't know what to say. I don't know what kind of clothes I should wear. I don't know the first thing about it, right? And And if you can't, that, to me, the most important relationship is the relationship between a man and a woman, right? That's the sort of cornerstone of everything. And if that thing is broken, and I'm going to be honest, if I was not married, oh my goodness, what the whole dating thing is progressively getting worse.
Yeah, it's not
progressively it's horrible. It's progressively getting worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And I have a 7-year-old. I have a 7-year-old son, and I'm interested in some of this, what's going on in the dating market, also because of what he's going to be confronted with. Mm-hmm. And I want him to be able to protect himself from certain things that I see happening consistently. I work at a university. I work at Ohio State. I'm the director of jazz studies there. And when I took the job, my predecessor who hired me, I took the job in 2004. When I came to Ohio State, I was teaching. Right before then, I was teaching in public school in Lansing, Michigan, and I was an orchestra director for Lansing Eastern High School. I had 5 jobs though. I was a professional musician, and then I had 20 students I was teaching, and I was a recording artist and all this stuff. You do all the stuff that you have to do if you're trying to have a career in music. Mm-hmm. You do all the stuff that I was actually had 2 teaching jobs, right? I was teaching full time at Lansing Eastern, and then in the evening, 3 days a week, I was a band director in another school district. And since I was full time and had benefits at the Lansing Eastern, I'm not even sure that it was legal to do that. Hopefully the statute of limitations is run out, because I just outed myself. But
I know that life well, though.
yeah. All of that stuff. All of that stuff. So I did that in when I got to when I was teaching. I wasn't a tenured teacher. I was a permanent sub in Lansing. I was a permanent sub. And so there were a number of stories where students were making allegations and teachers were getting fired, because it was a kind of some different kinds of stuff going on. And obviously some of that stuff was actually true, but then some of the stuff was not true. And it's students they were just ticked off at their teacher, and they wanted to find a way to penalize them. When I was teaching, I was 26 or something, and I was in high school, and so I think if there was an aggressive girl, she might think that she could talk to me, right? And so I became really interested in how can I protect myself, honestly. Mm-hmm. How can I protect myself against an allegation? And so when I came to Ohio State, one of the first conversations I had with my boss then was, all right, I was 29 when I took the job. Certainly there might be somebody that might want to make me a target or something. I don't want to be a target. What do I do to protect myself? And he said, look innocent. That was his advice. He said, look innocent. That is how I protect myself, is to look innocent.
Wow.
Now consider what that means. Now this is way back, and this is before Me Too, right? Mm-hmm. This is way back in 01. No, not 01. This is like 04, 05, right? Look innocent. And at first I thought he was giving me a sort of like a flippant, like almost like a brushing off what it was I was asking him. But then I started to realize that, yeah, that actually is the answer. So stuff like leaving your door open, if you have a student. And actually what I started doing is I started videoing every single lesson. Because I wanted to make sure that if somebody wanted to say something, I say, okay, let's see what the tape says.
Yeah. Yeah. Smart. I mean,
Yeah,
I work in criminal justice reform. I know how often people are wrongfully convicted and wrongfully accused, and there's no such thing as taking too much precaution, honestly.
it's a messed up thing, but I just yeah. So I got interested in that stuff because I want to know what to expect, and I want to know what kind of advice I should give my son.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I got in there, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I see this. This makes a lot of sense. So anyhow, you said I wasn't gonna just skip past that. I wanted to go back to this though. You said that you have a background in theater, and I'm curious as to how a musician and someone with a background in theater has ended up doing what it is that you're doing now.
Yeah, it was a long, twisty pathway, but I did theater growing up. I loved the theater. I loved to sing and perform, and was a songwriter as well. And so that's what I went to school for. I went to Belmont University in Nashville, which is a very big music school right on Music Row there. And I had a really cool college experience. I was like coordinating the Grammys red carpet when I was in my sophomore, junior year. I was, doing like behind the shows at award shows and coordinating all kinds of interviews and PR campaigns for people. So it was a great experience. I got to intern with Big Machine Records and Taylor Swift's management and a bunch of publishing companies. So I kind of did a lot while I was in college, got it out of my system, and recognized that I hated the industry, just hated it. I really, I looked around and, I just remember being at an after party from one of the award shows, and half the people were coked out and just drunk and sloppy. And I just remember looking around thinking, everybody here is miserable. They're so successful. They have all the money in the world, but they all cheat on their spouses and, are so insecure about their next move. And I just remember thinking, I have so many other talents. There's so many other things I can do, and I don't have to do this. And so it was kind of just a red pill moment, I guess, that made me recognize I didn't want to stay in that movement. But at that point, when I graduated, that was my degree. That was all of my experience and connections. So I did work in the industry for 5 more years. I worked for Entertainment One. That was when I worked at the Black Gospel label. And then I went on to do music licensing for them and placing songs and TV shows and film. But during that time, while I was working for E1, I was looking for a pathway out. So I knew I wanted to do something else. I thought I might go into mental health care because I was very passionate about that. Or I thought I might go into the law. And I wanted to make sure that whatever I did, I really liked it before I took on more student debt and spent more time getting another degree. So I found
we're gonna talk about that podcast that you talked about. That you did recently. Keep going now.
But so I stumbled into politics. I found this job that was part-time. I could do it on the side while working in music, that was working for a Second Amendment group in Tennessee. And I thought, I like the Second Amendment, and it was working for an attorney. So I thought I'd get to see his day-to-day and see if I actually liked it. So I did that. And I just absolutely fell in love with politics. I realized I didn't really like his day-to-day, but I loved what I was doing and the advocacy work. And so I took about 2 years from there, tried my hand at a bunch of things, did a lot of pro bono work, did do some work for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, worked on a couple of campaigns, started writing, started organizing millennials, trying to get some advocacy work done. And then in 2016, I went full-time with a free market think tank in Tennessee. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then during those 2 years, while I was sort of working to build out of music into politics and doing some work for NAMI, I first encountered criminal justice reform issues and just became very deeply upset by what I saw. It was totally news to me. I had no idea how the system was actually functioning. I really genuinely believed that, our founders had set us up to where it was better that, 100 guilty men go free than one innocent person perish. And we had all these checks and balances, and, our justice system was the greatest in the world. And, what a crock. So once I became acquainted with what was really going on, it was something that I couldn't not work on. I became very passionate about that and have continued to really focus on that above other policy priorities. So, yeah.
So I saw a picture of you on. It looked like you were at the doorway at Fox News.
Yeah, I did an interview with Fox News about 2 years ago. It hasn't aired yet, though. They recorded it. They did a whole segment with me on the death penalty. They have a producer that was in favor of getting rid of it, but she was working to convince her higher ups to air some stuff around it. And I don't think she's had any such luck yet, but we'll see. It's recorded. I'm ready to go.
And, okay. So, you know, I'm in academia. I'm a tenured professor, so I can say whatever I want about this next topic. You know,
I can't wait.
That's right. So I was on your based podcast, and you have an episode, How Government Broke Higher Education. And I only got through about half of it, but you know, you say some pretty spicy stuff in that first half. So one thing, you know, that sticks out, I mean, and we know about this. We know that school is more and more expensive, right? Students are taking on more and more debt. It's taking longer and longer to pay it off. And jobs are not really paying anymore. And often is the case that you studied, you used women's studies or gender studies.
That's always a good target, yeah.
That's right. You use that one.
Everybody agrees women's studies are not a good use of a $40,000 a year program.
Or basket weaving plus.
Yeah.
Whatever. You know, that may not be a great degree to go $100,000 in debt for. And so you went to college. Did you take on a lot of student debt?
Yeah, I did go to college, and I went to expensive college. Belmont is I don't know what it is now. I think it's somewhere between 35 and 40 now. It was about 32,000 a year when I went there. Fortunately, I had parents who helped me out significantly. I did take on some student debt, nowhere near what it would have been had I done it on my own. And honestly, you know, my concept of money when I entered Belmont was so minimal. I mean, I remember thinking like, who cares what it costs? You know, you take out student loans and you pay like $100 a month and you're done. I knew people that came out of Belmont with 120, 130,000 grand debt in student loans. You know, how do you, that's $700, $800 a month when you're first starting out just trying to pay your bills. You can't pay your mortgage with that, with what most entry-level jobs pay. You know, I don't know how people float it and survive. Had I had that kind of debt when I graduated, I would have had to have moved home. As it was, you know, I struggled in the music industry to make it for those 5 years. The music industry, contrary to what many people think, does not pay very well because it's collapsing itself. Nope. And so many people are willing to do it for less than you are. So they don't care if you're not willing to work for that. There's always somebody else who will. And so I felt very tricked. I felt tricked by the institution. I felt tricked by my, you know, leaders, people I had listened to. I thought I had been doing the smart thing by getting a degree. I wanted to be in music, but I recognized just getting a degree in music wasn't a great idea, because then if you didn't make it, what did you fall back on, right? And so I had a music business degree. I actually got a BBA, a business degree that had all the same qualifications as a regular business degree, but then added on things like artist management, copyright, law, things like that. So I had a more viable degree than some people. And yet, you know, when I graduated, I was making $30,000 a year. I was making essentially what I could make waiting tables, bartending. I remember at one point going to my boss in the music industry and being like, yeah, I'm going to quit. Like, I'm working crazy hours. You guys call me at like 11 p.m. at night, and I'm not making anything. I could go work at a restaurant and make more than this, you know? And after that, I got a raise and I got to work from home. So that was how they kept me around a little bit longer, because I really was at that point just going to go work at a restaurant. And I just think as a whole, there's a personal responsibility aspect to it, of course, like I should have done my due diligence, but also, we're asking 18-year-old kids to make these decisions. We're not giving them a financial background in high school. And let's also remember that people's brains aren't fully developed until they're 25. So, there's personal responsibility, but also we're letting 18-year-old kids take out $150,000, in debt for a worthless degree. So there's a societal problem there that I think we can't just shrug our shoulders at and say, well, you made the decision. Well, yeah, they made the decision. And I think that, the people who have made that decision should pay back what they owe, myself included. But we do need to fix the situation and quit allowing this to happen.
Yeah. I have, so I teach jazz saxophone, right? And so I have a studio, and there's a recruiting process, right? And the way it works in a school of music, at least with the conservatory model, is basically the studios. So if you want to study flute or whatever your primary instrument's going to be, that's sort of the gateway to getting into the school, right? If you can get into a studio, then you can get into the school, and then that's when you take the general education courses, the general music education, the core courses. And so one of the issues is the longer I've been doing this, the less viable the music industry has become, right? Mm-hmm. So now there's a lot of really talented, high school students these days. I mean, and the talent is actually keeps going up, but the places to employ that talent, the what they're going to pay is going down, and the opportunities are diminishing. So you have these factors. Now, who am I to tell someone that's super talented and all they ever wanted to do was be a world-class musician? Who am I gonna? I'm not gonna tell that person, no, don't come to me. Mm-hmm. But more and more, I find myself telling someone that maybe 10 years ago that I would have recruited and said, okay, you're going to have to work harder than everybody else, that maybe this isn't, maybe I'm not going to accept that student, right? Mm-hmm. But obviously it's a butts and seats problem again. It's a similar issue as to what we were talking about megachurches, right? If you have all these seats, you have all these expenses, then you gotta get butts in the seats. Mm-hmm. And so it's a machine, and it needs fresh bodies, and I know that sounds really, that sounded terrible.
That's accurate.
But that's what it needs. The machine needs, new blood. That's just how it works. And on top of that, and I've talked about this quite a bit on this series. You have this, what I refer to as being the academic bubble. So academic bubble. So see, in the academic bubble, that's not the real world. Okay. So academic bubble is those that have tenure, right? When you have tenure, then you have job security. Now, as long as you don't break the law, and as long as, the institution remains financially viable, then you're going to have a job. Mm-hmm. And you can stay there as long as you want. That's how that works. Because of that security, it is likely that you will become less and less aware of the outside world, right? You don't need to interact with it. You don't need to interface with it. You don't need to know how much something costs. You don't need to know what a gig pays. You don't need to know that stuff is not necessary, right? And so in my situation, I play gigs all the time. I frequently tour the Count Basie Orchestra, and I've got my own band, and I do other things. So usually in jazz studies, the folks that are teaching that discipline, they actually have a lot of gigs, and they're doing stuff out in the communities. So it makes them much better at teaching their students what they need to know to actually go hustle a gig. But in other areas, I'm not going to say explicitly who I'm talking about, but, especially maybe in some more traditional areas, it is likely that there will become more of a disconnect. And so then, therefore, the teacher is not actually equipped with the information to best show the student how to go hustle a gig in the actual music industry. Right? So you have these sorts of issues, and they're all over the place. And there's a lot of wrestling about trying to keep, things the way that they were. And the thing is that it's never going to be the way that it was. It has to change. And a matter of fact, it shouldn't have been the way that it was for as long as it was. But this tenure bubble, this academic bubble, gives the illusion that things are more stable than they actually are. I've had these thoughts about, reevaluating the way that we consider tenure. It used to be that tenure was the sort of protection so that people could say controversial things without fear of repercussion. That's what it used to be. That's what it was for, right? So you could research on a topic that was not popular. If you find some new information that sort of, upsets tips over the apple cart, it's okay. You're not going to be fired. Maybe somebody would say something mean to you, but they can't do anything to you. Now the way they do it is, if they really don't like you, they just keep giving you worse and worse assignments until you're so miserable that you just quit. That's how they do it now. But, people like Ben Shapiro and other conservative voices, or more conservative leaning voices, and actually even Bill Maher. Come on. We're barred from speaking at institutions, which are supposed to be these places of higher education, higher learning, where you're supposed to be confronted with different ideas and broaden your mind. But that's not actually what's happening. So it's a complicated, and there's a moral dilemma there.
Right. Well, what we've done is we've taken higher education and removed it from an actual market, right? And what you've done is you've allowed colleges to raise these tuition rates far above what people could actually afford to pay. Had government not gotten involved and started subsidizing these degrees, I couldn't have paid $30,000 a year to go to school. There's no way. Nobody could. I mean, unless you were very, very wealthy, no one could afford to pay this. And so the schools would have to reevaluate. They'd have to drop their rates. They'd have to make sure that the degree path they were offering actually led to concrete fields of work, and that those fields of work paid a certain amount. Right now at Belmont, for example, they don't care that their degrees don't equal jobs. They're getting paid no matter what this person ends up doing when they graduate. Doesn't matter that the field is collapsing and paying less and less and less. Belmont's still making their money. There's no way of holding them accountable if you pay for this pathway and don't end up getting a good degree or getting paid to work in this field. And so it's really very problematic. And they know what's happening with the music industry. And the problem with the music industry especially is, you can tell people who want to be in music all of this, right? You can say maybe you should pick another pathway, but people who want to be in music are ready to fight for it, right? They think they have it drilled into their head of, everybody's told they can't do it. You have to be the one that keeps going. You're going to make it. And so by nature of wanting to be in these creative fields, I think most people are programmed to reject cynicism, to reject negativity, to reject people telling them maybe they should pick another pathway. And they're going to keep going head first because they're all competing so heavily for that dream, for those few small spots. And so it's a great scam for these institutions. musicians, to be honest, especially places like Belmont that really hang their hat on the music driven careers and fields, and for them specifically the music business driven field and area focus. And it's no way based on the actual jobs or what they will pay when somebody comes out.
Yeah, definitely not. And when you were talking, I thought of another sort of analogy. One of the challenges that jazz studies has faced, struggling for, struggling for prominence within the conservatory model. The conservatory model was designed for European classical music, right? That's what that model is for. And so jazz is an outlier. It doesn't fit aspects of that model, but more and more schools offer, jazz degrees, which I think is a good thing. But in the beginning, I believe that there was some, racism and things associated with sort of marginalizing, jazz. There's sort of lingering terms, so for instance, to call classical music legitimate or legit is to mean that everything else, and in particular jazz and anything that came out of jazz, is not legit, right? Is not legitimate. The terminology like calling, a jazz composition, calling it a tune, but, a classical piece is a classical piece or a work, there's a, calling a jazz musician a jazzer, which is pretty kind of it's like a clownish kind of term. Like a classical musician wouldn't be what are you going to call him, like a baroque or something? You know what I'm saying? Just it's like it's this goofy stuff, right? And some of that stuff is from ignorance, probably, and maybe a fear. And I think, though, what's happened is I don't think that the racial thing is as big a component anymore. I think it started there, but now what I believe to be the sort of segregation or the sort of separation there is that I think that classical musicians perceive that jazz is a commercially viable art form, right? So it doesn't require this sort of government subsidy that every orchestra in the country is receiving. Mm-hmm. Everyone. Orchestra in the country. None would exist without government subsidy. Massive government subsidy. Mm-hmm. But jazz and everything that came out of jazz, all forms of popular music, anything that's commercial, any commercial music, it all came out of jazz, right? So all of that, it can stand on its own 2 feet. And so you sort of have this sort of something that requires government assistance and something that doesn't really. And so I think that's really these days what the rub is. It's not as I still think that there's some residue, some racial residue, but really I think that that's what the issue is. It took me a while to figure that out, but once I figured that out, then I was like, oh, that's what the issue is.
Makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, you're right. You're just it's a little bit of sour grapes because this can exist outside of this institution. Mm-hmm. And of course, I don't think that they would articulate it that way. They probably would never admit that. Anything else? I'm talking about motivation. Right.
Yeah, and I think there's always that competitiveness in music or in any performing arts category, I think, where when somebody's having commercial success, there's an attempt to demean it or explain it away or justify why it doesn't match what you're doing, and that's just so prevalent in those worlds. So I think that's a spot on analysis.
Yeah. All right. So you said you were a preacher's kid. So talk to us about how you grew up.
You want to talk about religious trauma? I'm kidding. Yeah, my dad is a Southern Baptist minister. We're from Alabama. So when I was born in Northern Alabama, and he was the pastor of a little country church there for the first 6 years of my life. And then we moved to Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, and he was a pastor of another small country church outside of Louisville there, while he was also getting his PhD from the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville. And once he graduated, he ended up teaching there as a professor in the Billy Graham School of Church Growth and Evangelism. And he did that for a number of years. He was traveling all over the country and speaking. And I'm the oldest of four. We were homeschooled. I think my mom insisted he stop traveling. So he took another church, went back into the ministry full time when I was 16, and we relocated to South Carolina. So he's still in the ministry at that church. And yeah, it's an interesting upbringing growing up as a pastor's kid. I often say, I was raised by a public figure, and people think I mean a politician, but I mean a pastor, because they're very much in the limelight, and their families stay in this sort of fishbowl. And there's a lot of interest in pastors' families, a lot of attention paid to their kids and what they do. So it's an unusual way to grow up. I think it's a hard way to grow up. I think as a kid, you don't get to make the same mistakes or have the same freedom to really mess up or kind of have some of that autonomy when everything you do is reflecting back on your parents and their position. So that's a little complicated, but as a whole, I love that I was raised in a religious household. I'm a person of faith myself. I definitely am not Southern Baptist. I think I would really put myself more in like a charismatic type church. I've been a refugee in South Carolina for the past almost year now since COVID. I was in New York City when it happened, but before that, I was living in Nashville, and my church there was Bethel World Outreach, which is a part of a denomination called Every Nation, and it's very focused on missions, but it's also very focused on unity in our country, and it's a very diverse church. They're focused on racial unity, they're focused on outreach, and they had more of, I guess, what would be a Pentecostal type theology, and I really loved being a part of that church. So that's more where I fall. Those are the kind of churches I grew up in. Yeah, they're so fun too. I love the worship, man. Like, they're just alive. When you walk in, you just really feel the spirit there, and you can just tell something powerful is happening in the room. It's an invigorating place to be in. And it gave me that sense, like I was talking about earlier, when you showed up at Bethel, of you weren't just here to check a box. Bethel was doing work. They were holding you to account. They were holding your feet to the fire. They were making sure that you were in community with people that were different than you and had different backgrounds than you, and that you really were working to create the kingdom of heaven on earth, and making sure that our church looked like what heaven would look like, and had people from all over the world that remembers. And it was just an exciting place to be.
A lot of community service.
A lot of community service. Yes. Very active. I helped them launch a special needs program while I was there that I was really excited about. They had a intensive process to become a member. You had to apply. You had to go through a membership class, and then they did an interview with you. So you weren't getting into Bethel if you weren't serious. And I remember in the interview phase, they asked me, like, okay, so what are you going to do to volunteer? Like, what's your area? And I listed mental health issues, and they said, well, what about special needs? We've been wanting to launch a special needs program. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that too. And so I got to work with some really lovely people in the church. Many of them were parents of kids with special needs. And I found out that actually only 1% of churches in the country have a special needs program, which absolutely blew my mind. I could not believe that. And found that, many parents with special needs children just quit going to church because they don't feel like they have anywhere to take their child. They can't take them into the service because they don't have the capacity to sit there quietly as people expect. And then they can't put them in the classrooms with other kids, because often oftentimes there's behavioral issues. And so a lot of them just don't end up coming. And it's very sad because these families are some of the people that really need the support of the church and the community the most. The divorce rate is really high among parents who have kids with special needs because of the stress that they incur. And that just really broke my heart when I found that out. So it was great getting to launch that. We did a lot of work building up a special space that had all kinds of equipment. We had weighted vests for kids that might need them. We had a lot of sensory type toys and programs to work with them on. So that was a really cool experience. And again, just got to work with some really incredible, lovely people.
Yeah. So you're like you're like actually a good person. That's what you're saying.
I don't know if I'd say that, but I try. I try to be a good person.
Right. That's which is what that's right. Which is what a Christian's supposed to say. That's right. So, yeah, the growing up as a preacher's kid, it's funny. I think your angle on that and the expectations, it's different than a lot of folks. There's almost like I don't want to say it's not a stereotype. It's like a cliche that preachers' kids often can be like a hot mess. They do all the stuff they're not supposed to do because they had all the structure, and so they just wanted to break free from that and do their own thing and go wild and everything. So a lot of preachers' kids actually, end up doing all kinds of, wild and crazy stuff. But you're one of the good ones, though. So
well, I had my phases. Let's not forget I was in the music industry, so I was having a good time.
Well,
no, but I get it. There is this sense of like that makes you want to rebel when you're held so closely and when there's so much. So I just not so much accountability, but it's more of a sense of not having autonomy, right? And that's a really terrible feeling, I think, for anybody to have. So I think it makes sense that they kind of course correct. But I think you'll find a lot of people maybe live up to the cliche and then circle back around. And for me, that was true. But I also, I try to be really open in the fact that while I am a person of faith, I'm a person who really struggles in my faith. I have a lot of like questions that I grapple with. And, I don't really, just as I feel a little bit politically homeless these days, I often feel religiously homeless as well. And don't always feel like I fit neatly into a bucket with what I think and what my theology lines up with. So, and I think that's okay, Yeah.
Look, I feel the same way, especially politically. I definitely don't fit. I don't fit in the boxes I'm supposed to fit in, the socially acceptable boxes. And as I said, my politics have changed somewhat. And honestly, my politics have changed even during COVID. During this pandemic, it's changed. I guess the core of it is still pretty similar, but honestly, some of the kind of black nationalist stuff that sort of came out during this thing. I don't know. I don't know.
You mean during the summer? Is that what you're referencing?
During the summer. Yeah. Since the pandemic started, I read a lot and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm always taking in information, and I've been having all of these great conversations with really great folks like yourself, these deep conversations, which has been keeping me sane, during this whole thing, but also it's been an opportunity to reevaluate what I think about a lot of things. I certainly am not, at least I don't want to be the kind of person that gets to a certain age, and then that means that nothing changes after that. No new ideas can penetrate. Mm-hmm. And so anyhow, maybe I've been willing to make adjustments to a fault, with certain things. I don't stay in one place for long enough to get any, to get any traction, that kind of a thing. And then as far as the the Christian thing, and I'm Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Orthodox Christian, and that's not the way I was raised. But I saw a lot of things about the way that I was raised, the kind of churches that I was raised in, that I had a lot of deep questions about history and continuity, and even basic questions. I think, well, not always basic, but really essential questions about, like, the development of the canon of Scripture. Like, where did the Bible come from? A long list of things. Why are there 30,000 denominations? It seems like the Bible's pretty clear that we shouldn't be divided, and all of that kind of stuff. I started having a lot of those kinds of questions. In first Christian apologetics, in particular Ravi Zacharias, mm-hmm. and William Lane Craig, folks like that. That was very helpful. And then I was just looking for continuity. It's like, how do I know that what it is that we're doing in churches these days is the intended thing? Like, who would know? Who would know? Let me look around and see, is there somebody that would know what it was like? And then this idea of apostolic succession. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. So maybe somebody does know, and then, so then that's what kind of led me to the Orthodox Church. But unfortunately, because I work at a missionary Baptist church, I'm not able to attend my church very often. But that's kind of the working musician thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is what it is. But, it's always moving around. It's keep it interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's a good thing to struggle with those things. I think so often people feel like they have to just adhere to how they were raised, and they're taught not to question things, or not to question God, and not to maybe experiment or move around or find out what other denominations and other religions think. And I think that's a mistake that we've pushed in many of our churches. I think it's a good thing. I feel like my faith has actually grown stronger even as I've grappled with my religion, and really, becoming more certain of, what do I absolutely know? I know there's a God. I know I have a relationship with him. I know he answers my prayers. I know his character. And I know how to model my life and who I should try to be like, which is Jesus, and how he lived his life. Those are the most important things. That's what you really need to know, right? Everything else, we can struggle through, and maybe we'll continue struggling throughout our lives. But I think if we can come together and agree on these things, then that's a great starting point. So I was talking with some people earlier this week. I work with a staff of people that are based all over the country, and many people who are across the political spectrum from me, many people of very different backgrounds than myself. But we had a sort of open prayer circle last week, and several of my colleagues came together of different faiths, and just kind of held time to pray together. And I thought that was really beautiful, and it was a really peaceful experience for me. It was something that I didn't really recognize I needed as much as I did until we did it. But I posted about it, and I had a lot of people that were sort of critical of that and said, like, oh, that's blasphemous to come together with people of other faiths and to pray together. And I thought, no, you're missing the point entirely of what religion is and of what faith is, right? And yeah, so I think it's great that you have, your church that you found that you really identify with theologically, and then are still able to minister to people in the other church and kind of have a foot in both worlds. And I'd love to have more opportunities myself to that end, because I just think there's a lot of really solid people of faith doing great work in this country, and it's encouraging to get to know them better.
So do you still sing in church?
Not lately. No, the last time I sang in church was for my dad's 10-year anniversary. We surprised him with a big, thing. So, I'd like to. I actually miss theater more than I do just singing. I'd love to get back in community theater, which of course right now there is none, but
that's
one
right.
day. Yeah.
All right. You can do virtual community theater.
That's right. And you know what, with this new network of Liberty Movement former music kids that I'm finding, I think I've got the cast. So I just need to pick a show.
There you go.
Do a fundraiser.
All right. Well, I feel like we could keep talking, but I think maybe we'll put in a pin in it here. and I think I'm going to have you back.
I'd love to come back
at some point. Hopefully beyond the pandemic, and to see what's going to happen. We'll leave some of the other questions I was going to ask you about this. The current president and some things. It is Inauguration Day, right? That's what it is today. But I think I'll leave some of those questions for our next time. We'll get some more time to see what actually happens. That sounds like
a great idea.
The speech was great, right? The speech was great, but I want to see how much of that actually goes down.
Yeah, let's see the action. And hey, maybe by then I'll actually get to be physically in Columbus again, because like I told you, we're moving some legislation there. So I'm hoping I get to be back in the state sooner than later. But
yeah, but please, please let me know when you're going to be in Columbus.
I will.
And we could do one of these in person. I don't know. Maybe I can show you to a couple of the places around or whatever.
Yeah, some of the jazz clubs. I'd love to see a gig.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Well, I'll be in touch. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the discussion.
All right. Now, you have a good one.
Okay.